Many people say they're not concerned at all about the fact that the government is gathering personal information and analyzing it. After all, the argument goes, if you've got nothing to hide, why worry about it? Well, not so fast, says our next guest. And joining us now for more on his concerns, in Washington, D.C., Daniel Solove. He is professor of law at George Washington University. And Professor Solove, it's good of you to join us on the line from D.C. How are you tonight?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Not at all. I suspect this is self-evident just by asking the question, but let's get it on the record anyway. In its most basic form, the I've got nothing to hide argument is what?
The nothing to hide argument is when people say, hey, I'm not really concerned about government surveillance or government listening in on my phone calls or collecting my data because I've got nothing to hide. I'm not doing anything wrong. Everything I'm doing is innocent. And unless you have something illegal that you're doing, then you shouldn't be concerned about government surveillance because they're only out to get the bad guys.
In the course of you doing your responsibilities, how often do you hear that?
All the time. It's everywhere. If you search the internet for nothing to hide, you'll see tons of instances where this argument is being made. I see it on the media. I see people interviewed every day. You actually see it in various academic arguments and political arguments, often couched directly as nothing to hide. Sometimes it's with slightly different terms, but the basic argument is the same.
Did the prevalence of hearing that argument have an effect on you that resulted in this book?
Yes, well, I'd heard it for quite a long time, and the issue then became, is there a good response, a response to this argument? What's wrong with it? And since it's so prevalent and so many people believe it and argue it, how can we respond to it? And that's what sparked my writing on this topic, was to really pick apart this argument and explain concretely and articulately what is wrong with this argument and why protection of privacy against surveillance matters.
Well, as we explore what your argument is, I should just preface that by saying we had a University of Ottawa professor named Michael Geist on the program recently, and he said, you got nothing to hide? Great, drop your pants. It was not perhaps the greatest academic argument for explaining why he was against that nothing to hide position, but perhaps you can help us in a somewhat more scholarly way answer the question of what your main issue is with nothing to hide as an argument. Sure.
Well, I think Professor Geist's argument was one common response to the argument is basically, hey, I'm going to point to something that you want to hide, and there are some things that you want to hide. But folks making the nothing to hide argument in a more sophisticated way will say, well, that might not be the subject of government surveillance. They're not going to get your naked picture. What people are really talking about is, I have nothing to hide when I'm talking on the phone, or I have nothing to hide in my metadata. And metadata is, the phone numbers that you're dialing, or the numbers that are dialing into you, or who you're emailing, and so on and so forth. And so people will say in that grouping of data, there's nothing to hide. But there's a response to that, a response that you don't need to just point to things that people actually want to hide. And that is, the nothing to hide argument sees privacy in too narrow a way. It sees privacy as protecting discreditable secrets about people. But there's a lot more to privacy than just protecting against secrets. Privacy is about power. It's about how much power the government should have to explore the deepest parts of our lives. How much information should the government have? What should the government be able to do with that information? There's a lot of instances where even if you're doing nothing wrong, you might not want government surveillance of your activities.
I should hasten to add that I think Michael Geist was being facetious. In fact, I know he was being facetious when he said that. And he also said, if you've got nothing to hide, you're not leading a very interesting life. But the issue around this assumption of privacy, have we just lost that in this society today?
I don't think so. One of the things that's actually been encouraging is some of the public opinion polls that are coming out after the Snowden leaks about the NSA surveillance. And people are not supporting the NSA in this. People are pushing back and saying that they think that the government surveillance is too much and needs to be reined in. So I think what we're actually seeing is, from the public, a sense that there is privacy and it is worth protecting, and they do care and they want more privacy.
Well, there is some evidence to what you just said, and I note that after the NSA surveillance story broke, George Orwell's 1984, the sales of it on Amazon.com spiked 7,000%. However, I wonder whether Franz Kafka's The Trial ought to have seen a similar rise in sales. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and briefly, the 1984, the Orwell book, is about this totalitarian society that watches everything that people are doing. And they're brutally oppressive. You know, people do anything out of line, there's strict discipline for it. And it really captures this very oppressive, scary life of living under a ruthless regime. But to some extent, that might not be totally fitting for the world we live in. And I think Kafka, in his book, The Trial, better captures some of the modern privacy issues that we face. And in Kafka's book, it opens with this guy, wakes up, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and government officials are at his door and tell him, "You're under arrest." And he asks them, "Why? What did I do wrong?" And they say, "Oh, we can't tell you that." He asks more questions about what's going on. He has no idea what's going on, and they don't tell him. And then they leave. And he spends the rest of the novel trying to figure out what's going on. And what he learns is that there's this secret court system that has compiled a dossier about him with all these facts about his life, and apparently is making judgments about him, but they're in secret. And he has no idea what's going on or the decisions made about his life. And I think this captures what's going on with data these days. Decisions about our lives are being made based on personal information. It's being used in a lot of ways, and yet people have no participation in that process. They have no knowledge of what's going on, and yet things can happen to them based on that data. And that's a position of powerlessness and helplessness that I think needs to be addressed.
Just to be clear, do you think we are living in times which are like Franz Kafka's The Trial?
I think there's a lot of features of what's going on that are reminiscent of The Trial. Look at airline screening, for example. You know, someone goes to the airline, sorry, you're going to be singled out for extra screening, or sorry, you're not allowed to fly, you're on the no-fly list. And they say, why? Oh, we can't tell you that. Why is my name there? What reason is there for this? No explanation. Is it because I was in an anti-war demonstration? We can't tell you. You just can't fly. How do I stop this? What do I do? Oh, you can maybe file some complaint that maybe or may not be addressed. At one point, they really didn't listen to complaints. Now they do a little bit. But even then, it might be, you know, is your name in fact accurately spelled on the list? But it's not. I want to know what gets me on the list and what doesn't get me on the list. If I do a search on the internet for something, does that put me on the list or doesn't it? If I say a word on the phone, does that put me on the list or not? How do I know what I do in my behavior and its effects on my life? And that people aren't being told. That, to me, is very Kafkaesque, where we really don't know what's going on and how our behavior is actually triggering various denials of the right to travel or limitations or extra scrutiny.
Okay, having said that though, I know you said a few moments ago that the evidence that you see as a result of the NSA story is that the American people are starting to push back against this. However, the American people also seem to revel in giving up a great deal of their privacy by putting some of their most intimate moments out there on Facebook or out there on Instagram or Pinterest or all of these other sites. Do you see a bit of a dichotomy in the way the American public approaches this issue?
There is, but I think there are also nuanced understandings of privacy these days. So let's say you have someone with 300 Facebook friends and they post something on Facebook. What are their privacy settings? Did they set it to friends only? If that's the case, they want their 300 friends to see it, but they don't want someone at the NSA to be looking as well. There are things that we expose to a lot of people, but that doesn't mean we want to expose them to the world or we want some government official scrutinizing everything we do. That's also the case where someone might be fine exposing themselves to the public to engage in a political rally. There's a difference between that and then having their entire participation in the rally videotaped, stored in some gigantic NSA database, and then used in however knows which way, combined with other data, and a file amassed about that person. Someone might say there's a big difference. Yes, I engaged in a political rally, but I didn't sign up for having this massive file about me kept forever at the NSA.
In your book, Nothing to Hide, you do go through a bit of a checklist of potential harms that come as a result of our loss of privacy. And I want to go through a bit of some of that checklist right now and just get you to embellish on these somewhat. You talk about the harm of aggregation. What is that?
Well, aggregation is the fact that you can have a lot of small pieces of data that in isolation are rather innocuous. Your name, your address, your race, the fact that you like to drink Coca-Cola rather than Pepsi. All these little facts about somebody that each piece isn't very telling. But the fact is that when you start aggregating them together, when you combine them, you start to see patterns. You start to be able to make inferences about a person's life, and you can learn more information than they might have revealed. So a bunch of non-sensitive pieces of information can add up together to reveal something quite sensitive about a person. They might reveal a person's religion, or they might reveal a person's political beliefs, or they might reveal the fact that a person is suffering from a particular disease. And you can look at that by analyzing people's behavior, patterns, purchases, and so on. And that's what big data, as it's now called, does. It takes a lot of these little pieces of information and then figures out what people might be interested in, what their hobbies are, what their wealth is, and other things. And they can do it with, they can actually find out quite a lot of intimate personal information that people never wanted to expose.
Let's do another. The harm of exclusion. What's that?
Well, exclusion is a harm where it's about being excluded from participating in the way that our information is collected, used, and shared. And that means that, right now, for instance, before the leaks on Snowden, the NSA is doing all this stuff with our data, collecting it, using it. Nobody knows. No one has a right to find out what data are they gathering, what are they doing with it, is the data legitimately collected or not, is this data they should have or not, are these uses appropriate or not. There needs to be scrutiny and transparency over the way our data is being used, and ultimately participation of the people in that data. Because in a democracy, the people are the boss. We're the boss, not the NSA. The NSA doesn't rule us with an iron fist. We rule the NSA. And we should be able to know what they're doing and at least have a sense of, are their activities appropriate? Are they collecting data about our speech? Are they collecting data about political activity, about religion, about who we associate with? How are they using the data? Are there uses that are not appropriate for that data that we think we should limit? Is there appropriate oversight of that? What data do they have about me? Should I be able to find out? Can I have a participation and a voice in all this? Or is this all just going to be done without my knowledge, without my consent, without my ability to even raise an objection or be heard? That's the problem of exclusion.
Since you just asked the question, I'm not sure if you actually asked it seriously or just rhetorically, but do you know what they know about you and how they're using that information?
I think we know just a little. I think we know the surface of it, but we don't know a lot. We know what was leaked, and that's something, but that could just be the tip of an iceberg. There could be more, there could be less. We really don't know. And that goes to, I think, a real larger problem with this. We should have more knowledge. The argument on the other side that folks in the national security community will often raise is, well, if you tell what we're doing, you tip off the terrorists. The terrorists now know, and therefore it's not effective. I don't totally buy that. I think there's some truth to that if you say precisely all the techniques that are being done, the terrorists could adjust. But you still need to say something, because ultimately in a democracy, the people can't be the boss, and they can't be free unless they understand what their leaders are doing. And if they don't know what their leaders are doing and they can't evaluate it, then how is this a democracy? And how can the people say, I don't like that, I reject that? Because ultimately, I think in a democracy, it's for us to choose. We choose. Do we like this level of surveillance, or don't we want this? Do we like this level of oversight, or don't we? Is this activity okay or not? We can't evaluate that and make a decision on that and decide who to vote for and who not to vote for if we don't know what's going on.
Let's talk about another.
I think that's just fundamental. You can't have a democracy if you don't have transparency about this.
Sure. Let's talk about another potential harm. You refer in your book to something called secondary use. What's that refer to?
Well, secondary use is taking information that's gathered for one purpose and then using it for an entirely different purpose without a person's consent. Example would be, you know, I buy a product from you. You say, I'd like to email you the receipt. May I have your email address? Sure, here's my email address. And then you take my email address and then you use it to start marketing to me or sending me all sorts of other messages. I will say that's a secondary use. I didn't want my email used that way. I gave it to you for this purpose, and now you're using it for another purpose. And that could be, I think, a big problem. When people give out information, they give it out with an expectation of how it's going to be used. And it could be used in a totally new way. That's a problem if people don't consent to that use.
Have you seen evidence that the government can get its hands on that information and potentially distort that information for perhaps reasons we're unaware of?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what we have now is that the government is gathering a lot of information in various public records. Information about, you know, money that you pay, your finances that you pay in taxes, information that you get that you might do when you fill out a census form, information about marriages, and information you give out for licenses, and information you might give out if you're employed by the government. There's all these pools of data. And they're collected for those purposes. And then the issue is, should data collected for one of those purposes then be allowed to be used for a different purpose? And when you take data collected for one purpose and you start using it for something different, there might be some distortion, because if I knew that I were giving out data for this wholly different purpose, I might give out more data, or I might explain the story that I didn't explain when I gave out the data in the first place, because I had no idea it was going to be used in this new way. And so I think it can result in the fact that when you take data that is focused on one thing and you suddenly start using it for something else, it might not totally fit 100%. And then there's distortion because the data isn't quite perfectly matched to what you're trying to do with it.
Okay. Professor Solove, we've got about 5 minutes left here, and in that time I want to focus on the subtitle of the book, which is what you call the false trade-off between privacy and security. The American people, it seems to me, since 9/11, have been prepared to give up a great deal of their privacy in order to ensure that no more bombs explode unexpectedly on their home territory. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think that's the way it was couched. And after 9/11, the polls were actually very much in favor of giving up rights and privacy and civil liberties in order to get security. And that's what the pollsters asked. They said, do you want the government to listen in on your phone calls in order to stop terrorism? And most people said, of course, anything to stop terrorism. The problem is that that was a false trade-off. That's not what privacy involves. The question is wrongly phrased. The Fourth Amendment, which is our protection of privacy, their constitutional protection of privacy against the government, allows the government to do very invasive searches. The government can search your home, it can search your computer, it can search you, and it can do all that, but only if there's the appropriate judicial oversight and justification. In order to do that, you need a warrant, supported by probable cause. That has to be, the government has to go to a court and get that. And the court has to determine, is the government justified, are the law enforcement officials justified in getting that information? But it's not about, can the government search your home or not? Of course the government can search your home. Of course the government should be able to listen to phone calls. Of course the government should be able to do surveillance. That's not the issue. It's not all or nothing. The issue is, should the government be able to do surveillance with judicial oversight, having to justify why it needs to do the surveillance, or should it be able to do the surveillance without any oversight, without any need to justify its actions? That's the real question, because that's what privacy is. It's not the government can't listen, the government can't engage in surveillance, the government has no power to stop terrorism. It's about how much oversight do we want in place? How much accountability do we want the government to have when it does this? Now, how much transparency do we want? All these things can make some of the government's efforts less efficient. So it's more efficient for the NSA just to put everyone under surveillance, collect the reams of data that it's collecting without anyone looking over its shoulder, without any limitation. It's a little less efficient if they have to go to a court and get more justification, or have to meet a higher standard to get that, or have transparency and accountability over that. But that's what protecting privacy is all about. It's about making sure that when the government does engage in surveillance, when it does something in the name of security, that we really are getting our money's worth. We're really getting security. We're really getting privacy. And often, when people make the security argument, well, just let us do what we want, well, that's basically saying, let us be unaccountable. Totally trust us and let us do what we do, even if it turns out that what we're doing is not effective and you're giving up rights for nothing.
It does feel, though, as if the pendulum is definitely swinging in the direction of, we're prepared to give up more privacy, you just make sure that we're safe. And I wonder what you think it will take to get the pendulum swinging back in the direction which clearly you would like to see it move in.
Well, I think that after the summer, I'm encouraged because the polls are very different. The polls taken this summer were very different than the polls taken, let's say, circa 2001 to 2003 or 2004, where the polls were very, very much on the security side. I think now the public seems to be thinking there should be some limitations on the NSA. The same arguments that, worked very well after 9/11 now are not working as well. And the public isn't really moved by them and is pushing back a little bit. Whether that leads to any real, strong change, I don't know. I think part of it is the fact that, there's a resistance among our political leaders to listening to what the people want, such that I'm not sure that even if the public really wanted change here, if Washington could really get that job done. I think we're seeing some mild measures that the president has proposed. I don't think they're nearly enough, but there's a small bone thrown in the direction of privacy. I think a lot more needs to be done. But I haven't really seen, I've actually seen more concern among the American people than among their representatives.
The name of the book is Nothing to Hide, The False Trade-Off Between Privacy and Security. Daniel Solove, we're very grateful you could join us on the line from George Washington University tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.